Wednesday, February 22nd, 2023 afternoon session of the Portland City Council. Keelan, good afternoon. Please call the roll.
Good afternoon. Rubio.
Here.
Ryan.
Here.
Gonzalez.
Here.
Knaps.
Here.
Wheeler.
Here. Now we'll hear from legal counsel on the rules of order and decorum. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Portland City Council. City Council is holding hybrid public meetings with in-person attendance in addition to electronic attendance. If you wish to testify before council in person or virtually, you must sign up in advance by visiting council agenda on the council clerk's webpage at www.portland.gov/council/agenda. You may sign up for communications to briefly speak about any subject. You may also sign up for public testimony on resolutions, reports, or the first reading of ordinances. Written testimony may be submitted at cctestimony@portlandoregon.gov. Your testimony should address the matter being considered at the time. When testifying, please state your name for the record. Your address is not necessary. Please disclose if you are a lobbyist. If you're representing an organization, please identify it. For testifiers joining virtually, please unmute yourself once the council clerk calls your name. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during city council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. The presiding officer determines the length of testimony. Individuals generally have 3 minutes to testify unless otherwise stated. A timer will indicate when your time is done. Disruptive conduct such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony or council deliberations will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in the person being ejected for the remainder of the meeting. After being ejected, a person who fails to leave the meeting is subject to arrest for trespass. Additionally, council may take a short recess and reconvene virtually.
Very good. Thank you. And we have one item for this afternoon. It's a resolution, item number 164, please.
Refer charter amendment to voters to establish transparency advocate in Office of the Auditor at the May 16th, 2023 special district election.
Good afternoon, Madam Auditor. Thanks for being here.
Thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, and good afternoon, commissioners, as well as Council President Ryan. My name is Simone Reddy, and I'm the elected auditor for the City of Portland. You may call me Madam Auditor. My office's mission is to promote open and accountable government by providing independent and impartial reviews, access to public information, and services for city government and the public. I'm joined today by leaders from our community and experts on transparency and accountability. We're here to advance a charter amendment proposal to voters with your support. This proposal is to create a transparency advocate in my office that would be available to the public as well as city employees. Consistent with the authority charter grants my office to investigate the acts of city bureaus, the transparency advocate would continue to resolve issues of openness and transparency. This charter amendment would give this position the unique authority to investigate the acts of all city officials as they relate to records of transparency. City charter currently exempts the acts of elected officials from my office's scope. This proposal is both timely and urgent. It is responsive to our city's changing form of government. It is appropriate and necessary as a check on the newly separated branches of legislative and executive government that will define our city by January 2025. If approved by voters in May, this charter amendment will take effect immediately, and my office is committed to leading and funding its implementation. Before we delve deeper into how this charter amendment will be implemented, I want to remind you where it came from. The last time this proposal was brought to you here in council chambers was January 19th, 2023. It was presented to council by two former co-chairs of the 2020 Charter Review Commission, Deborah Porta and Brenda Kita. It was one of 6 proposals that they recommended to you that day. Their presentation was followed by public testimony during which concerns were raised about the lack of urgency with which the city was acting to establish a government transition advisory committee. The delay and silence around that initiative that community members experienced was an opportunity for public input in this very important transition and the very substance of concerns that this charter amendment proposal would address. The January 19th presentation concluded the work of the Charter Commission. It followed the report that was issued and posted on the city's website, and its final public meeting was on December 3rd, 2022. Prior to that, the commission heard public testimony highlighting this proposal and the problems that it seeks to solve on 4 different occasions. A public hearing on November 19th, 2022, a public hearing on November 17th, 2022, an information session on June 28th, 2021, and for the first time at a work session on May 27th, 2021. All of those meetings are documented on the city's website. In the December 3rd meeting, the city attorney's office confirmed their review of this proposal and that while it was actionable, it still needed some work. It also confirmed that my office has the authority to investigate transparency and openness. The proposal received 12 yes votes, 4 abstains from the commission, and there were 0 no votes. In the commission's deliberations, it agreed not to send the proposal directly to voters so that council could discuss it and work on it with its proponents. I have continued that work. I have taken leadership of the commission's recommended proposal because it clearly aligns with our city's values. I've made this proposal my business because it affects my office's duties. Its proponents trust me to ensure that it gets your attention and is ultimately decided by voters. Over the last 2 months, my office has engaged with charter commissioners, community members, and technical experts to refine the proposal. It has benefited from the involvement of community organizations like the ACLU of Oregon, the League of Women Voters, the Greater Society of Professional Journalists, and Open Oregon. Our office also solicited and considered feedback from all council offices and the city attorney's office. Because the transparency advocate's role will be interfacing directly with the public and city employees, this position also serves as a means of community engagement on the topic of openness and transparency itself. It is everyone's responsibility at the city to deliver on the promise of transparency, but it is no one's responsibility to conduct community engagement around this issue or address these issues systematically. With the creation of this position, we are creating a dedicated place for community feedback to be heard and a way for practices citywide to be improved. This is exactly the type of engagement that I envision for the auditor's office so that diverse communities have the opportunity to influence our work. The transparency advocate would directly contribute to this goal. So how will this position fit within our existing structure? It will occupy a new classification within the Ombudsman's office, which is an office under my purview. How much will it cost? My office has estimated this at $130,000 to $170,000 per year. My office is willing to cover this cost as one full-time position for the next 2 years. That means it would have no financial impact on the city's general fund until 2025. The associated costs of technology, administrative, and communication support would also be covered using my office's existing resources. Our office also considered the cost of a special election in the timing of this request. Since council referred the children's levy renewal to the May 2023 ballot, the addition of this measure would not incur any additional elections costs. Waiting to call a special election later this year or early next year could incur hundreds of thousands of dollars in expense particularly since those elections would not be shared with other jurisdictions as the May election is with school districts. So why does Portland need a transparency advocate? And why does Portland need a transparency advocate now? In addition to the comments heard by the Charter Commission over the last 2 years, you've received written testimony in advance of this meeting from civic leaders like former Oregon Secretary of State Phil Kiesling and senior fellow at Portland State University's Center for Public Service, Barbara Dudley. They both urge you to send this proposal to the ballot. My office has also invited guests to help answer these questions. Former Charter Commissioner Brian Lewis is with us to explain why the commission recommended this measure to council. Unfortunately, former commissioners Deborah Porta and Candace Avalos were unable to join us today, but Commissioner Lewis has agreed to share their written testimonies with us. I want to thank all of the charter commissioners for their service, and I will turn it over to Commissioner Lewis to share his remarks.
Good afternoon.
Yep, we hear you.
Perfect. Thank you. My name is Brian William Lewis. I'm a former charter commissioner. When the Transparency Advocate proposal was first brought to us in June of 2021, we were very interested. I became even more intrigued as I spearheaded conversations with the City of Atlanta Transparency Officer that October, along with former Oregon State archivists and others. What appealed to us on the commission was that this proposal is based on a proven model and good government practices ensconced all over North America. That is, an ombudsman only with a transparency focus. At the state level, here in Oregon, a similar position led to dramatic improvements in just 2 short years. Not only this, but the proponents had already run this proposal by several lawyers and experts, meaning that by the time it got to our commission, it was practiced, vetted, and nearly ready to pass. Unfortunately, we ran out of time and were not able to have all of the discussions we had hoped. So I was glad that in January of this year, our newly elected auditor, Simone Reed, took on the task. In addition to conducting further community engagement, the auditor has conducted multiple rounds of legal review, leading to further revisions to address every concern and ensure that this language is consistent with not only the charter, but every other applicable law. Mayor Wheeler, in 2020, you and the City Council adopted a resolution recognizing transparency as a core value of the city. But the city has yet to take steps necessary to operationalize needed institutional and cultural change. This proposal allows all of you to take that step, putting Portland hand in hand with a small group of cities around the country that have established offices to support transparency, such as Atlanta and Toronto, or that have adopted transparency as an actionable value, such as Kirkland, Washington, San Francisco, and Madison, Wisconsin. To be honest, some of the charter commissioners and many in the community felt that sending this proposal to council would be like asking the fox to provide advice on henhouse design. But I prefer to think that if we are to do what has been asked of us and reach to a new horizon of what local democracy can be, if we maintain our position near the head of the pack of cities who innovate and dare, we would do well to ensure that our new people's government was one worthy of trust and that has forged out democracy. I respectfully urge you to do the right thing and vote aye for this well-vetted good government proposal. Thank you. If I may continue to read on behalf of former Commissioner Deborah Porta. I am submitting written testimony in support of Agenda Item 164 to establish a transparency position as a member and co-chair of the City Portland Charter Commission. I voted in favor of forwarding this recommendation to the City Council. I'm writing today to strongly encourage commissioners to adopt this proposal in a time when accountability is inconsistent at best and trust with Portland has been badly damaged. Creating this position would send a strong signal that the council understands the importance of transparency and is committed to the city's core values, in action as well as words. While vacancies on the City Charter Commission prevented moving this proposal directly to Portland voters, this issue of transparency was a frequent topic raised by Portlanders throughout the charter review process. This matters to Portlanders, and it should matter to this council. The proposal before this council today is a well-constructed one based on proven models and extensive expert input. The transparency advocate position agenda item is not only much needed for this city, but is a solid proposal that City Council should approve without fail. If I may continue, this is the testimony of former Charter Commissioner Candace Avalos. Mayor Wheeler, Commissioner Rubio, Commissioner Ryan, Commissioner Maps, and Commissioner Gonzalez. Transparency is what keeps our democracy running, which is why I'm here as a former Portland Charter Commissioner to urge you to let voters decide whether to establish an office of the Transparency Advocate. Recent newspaper reports show officials in City Hall claiming that the proposal before you for vote today has not received vetting, community engagement, or undergone revisions. That simply is not true. Even though what the Charter Commission voted on was a draft to be sent to Council for approval, the reality is that that was a second draft, and it was based on well-accepted good government research with expert and lawyer input. Not only that, but since the Charter Commission voted 12-0 to recommend this proposal for more vetting, the auditor took on the baton and gave it additional multiple rounds of vetting, targeted engagements, legal review, and revision, including to address concerns shared by City Council and the City Attorney. I am grateful that the auditor took on the job because many of us on the Charter Commission feared the City Council would bury this proposal. If I'm reading the latest media reports correctly, that fear was justified. While people who prefer secrecy will claim that this proposal is complicated and risky and still needs more vetting, the truth is this proposal is not rocket science. It is simply a transparency-themed ombudsman. Any claim to the contrary by members of City Council are not based on accurate information. In 2020, Mayor Wheeler and the City Council approved transparency as a core value for the city. If that is true, then you will let voters decide whether to establish this office. I urge you to vote yes on transparency. Thank you. Candace Avalos, former Charter Commissioner and Community Advocate. I thank this body for giving me the time to speak today, and again, urge you all to vote aye on this very important proposal for the future of our city. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it.
So now that you've heard some more about the process that this proposal took to get here and the need for a transparency advocate to ensure a successful charter transition, as well as the importance of this issue for communities of color to participate in their government, you're going to hear from practitioners in Oregon and Atlanta who can speak to the benefits of having a dedicated resource like this for our city, as well as the public to address issues of transparency. They're going to tell you why Portland needs a transparency advocate to build trust in city government as it makes this historic transition. At this time, I would like to invite Kristen Denius, Chief Transparency Officer for the City of Atlanta, and Ginger McCall, former state Public Records Advocate, to share their remarks.
This is Kristen. Would you like me to go first?
Yes.
Good afternoon. Greetings from Atlanta. My name is Kristen Denius. I am the Chief Transparency Officer for the City of Atlanta in Georgia. And I would love to share with you guys a little bit about the benefits that I have seen as an employee of the City of Atlanta and as a resident of the area with the creation of my position. First of all, I started off at the City of Atlanta as an attorney in the city's law department, and I was in that role for about 18 years before I transitioned into my current position. One of my duties was to advise on open records, Georgia Open Records Act compliance within the City of Atlanta, and there was a training component with that. When this position was created, the mayor at the time, Mayor Bottoms, asked me to fill that role. And so my position is created in the executive branch of our government. And, but I am appointed by the mayor and confirmed by our city council. So I do have some independence in that regard. And I do, my role seems very similar to what is being proposed in Portland as a transparency advocate, in that I do a lot of interface with the public, and I act as a resource for both the public and our elected officials and our employees on how to best comply with the requirements of our Georgia Open Records Act. So my authority specifically does extend across all city employees and elected officials as well. So I additionally have an investigative component where a complaint has been made against someone within the city government around failure to comply with the provision of the Open Records Act. However, what I see as my main goal is to avoid that from happening entirely. So I do have a policy role and a training role at the City of Atlanta. And I have been, and I'm knocking on all the wood I can find, very successful in averting any of the situations that sort of led to the creation of my position. And you can easily Google City of Atlanta and Georgia Open Records Act and see what some of those things were. We did not have a good reputation in the late 2010s. And since I have been in my position, we have managed to avoid any similar situations repeating. Just a few of the things that I have noticed in this position that are different than the experience I had with a very similar topic when I was in the city's law department is that the ability to have one centralized contact point for citizens is huge. Many times citizens do not have a good sense of how to even get started contacting someone in their government. And it leads to a lot of confusion and a lot of bad feelings when the process probably worked fine. But they just came away feeling as though they were lost in the machine, maybe a cog in the wheel. And especially since we, those of us who work inside government, we understand how we do things and it makes perfect sense to us, but citizens don't necessarily have that information. And so having a place to go to maybe even just brainstorm, hey, I think this is kind of what I'm looking for. What's the best way to go about that? Where should I ask? Has been really helpful. And I've received a lot of very positive feedback directly from citizens about that specific piece. The other thing that's really been very useful is that in my experience, a lot of the issues that we see around open records and open meetings compliance and just transparency in general involves a mismatch in understanding. So folks in the community either don't understand or have bad information about what is required by the government under these laws. And so having somebody like me who they can have a more in-depth conversation with to explain those things when they have a question or think something has gone wrong really helps a lot. So it de-escalates the situation. I can provide information and explanation that, say, someone in the law department could not, because it might be considered to be legal advice to a citizen. And so that has been shockingly helpful for my personal opinion. The other thing that someone in my position kind of creates is an opportunity for folks within the city government to have somebody to hand off a citizen who is perhaps displeased with their experience to date. So I am frequently offered as a resource if somebody seems to be having a difficult time, and then I can engage and do the explanation piece that I described a minute ago. And it really is kind of a low stakes way for people within city government to provide a service around transparency without having to take that on themselves. And it alleviates a burden in the law department for the lawyers who would have otherwise been trying to navigate that process, walking the line between not giving legal advice, but sort of diffusing a potential legal liability situation with a violation of a statute. So those are, and the other thing that I do is I have a lot of information that I have made available in kind of layman's terms on a website that I have available to the public with frequently asked questions and links to internal policies and things like that that I've created. So all of those things have been surprisingly helpful, and we have had a really good experience with this process so far at the City of Atlanta that is drastically different from the experiences we were having in the transparency realm up until that point. I'd be happy to answer any questions if it's appropriate at this time, or I can hang out and wait.
You have a question? Commissioner Gonzalez, first of all, thank you for your testimony, Kristen. Commissioner Gonzalez has a question for you.
Thanks so much for your testimony, Kristen. Can you remind me of your title in the City of Atlanta and where you report in the hierarchy there?
Absolutely, sure. So my title is Chief Transparency Officer. That sounds really fancy. It's really just me. I'm not really chief over anyone but myself and maybe my cat and dog, and definitely my kids. But and I report technically up through the executive offices, which is part of the mayor's office. But I do not sit in the mayor's office physically. My actual office is in the law department for convenience, for a couple of reasons. One, that's where my office was when I made the transition. And also my administrative support is through the law department. And I do work closely with members of the law department at the City of Atlanta on occasion on different matters. So it just made sense from a practical standpoint for me to stay in that kind of reporting structure. I also report up through the city attorney for just administrative purposes. So she's the one who would sign off on my leave requests if I were to submit one. But there was a lot of deliberate thought put into how to make my position as independent and not not dramatically aligned with either the legislative or the executive parts of our government.
Got it. And so is your background as an attorney or paralegal? I didn't quite hear the threshold.
Attorney,
Oh,
yes, attorney.
So how does privilege work from your vantage point in your role?
I don't have any.
Okay.
I am an attorney. I'm still barred in Georgia. And I do have 18 years of experience as an attorney with the City of Atlanta. And a lot of people at the city know me in that context, which can present problems. And I regularly remind folks that their conversations with me are no longer privileged because I'm no longer acting in a capacity as a legal counsel for the City of Atlanta.
Got it. And when there is a complaint that is filed by a member of the public, they would initiate that complaint with you if it relates to a public records item, or how do citizens engage with you in the context of a complaint?
So we have a lot of different ways that can happen. So all of my contact information is available on my website at the City of Atlanta. And sometimes I joke that my name must be written on a wall somewhere because people find me from all over the place. But so someone can submit a formal complaint to me in any way that they can get it to me, probably most typically via email, and it can be very formal. It can be, this is a complaint and I'm complaining about this and this happened on this day. And then I would proceed from that. Or it could be as simple as somebody shooting me an email saying, hey, I'm concerned about this request. I'm not sure it's being handled properly. And I will also look into that. So we don't have any sort of a threshold for what is considered to be an actionable complaint for me to inquire about. And a lot of the time, the informal complaint, it's more of like an alert, is an opportunity for me to step in early on in a process before there's actually been any violation of the law and just make sure that everybody stays on the rails. And that happens a lot. And it's been a very helpful and useful process for us at the city. Now, I don't know that what's proposed for you all would be in a similar position to be able to do that. But in the instances where I've received a complaint, a similar process is followed. I mean, I reach out to the inside folks and say, hey, look, I've received this complaint. I'd like a response from you within X amount of time, and then I proceed from there. So far, every single time that's happened, it has been a misunderstanding that I've sort of had an opportunity to mediate, and I sort of think of that in the same regard as a process that we have available through the Georgia the Georgia Attorney General's office. Their open records compliance folks have a formal mediation process where citizens can send a complaint, and they do the very similar thing. They'll reach out to whatever agency is being accused of malfeasance or wrongdoing or whatever, and kind of work it out. And it works way better than the other option, which is for a citizen to file a lawsuit.
Got it. So last two questions related to this. Walk me through the differences for you in engaging with a member of the public versus a member of the press. Like, does the press interact with you? Do they come to you for guidance as well? And is there material differences in that engagement?
Sure. I mean, the only material difference in that engagement is that when I do receive communications from a member of the news media or the print press or even bloggers or anybody who's sort of media adjacent, I will alert our mayor's office of communications just so that they're aware, because they do have standing relationships with a lot of these folks. And it's helpful for them to know if somebody's having difficulties or has a question. But other than that, there's really no difference in the way that I interact with the news media or just a regular citizen, because the law applies to everybody the same. And my interest is in making sure that we stay within the guardrails of the law at all times. The news media is actually, I'll save you the trouble of Googling, our local print newspaper and kind of media organization, AJC WSB, was part of the process of my position being created. They filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office in our state about some activities that happened at the end of 3 mayors ago, 2017-ish. And so the city ended up entering into a settlement agreement with the Attorney General's office and one of the provisions was the creation of a position like mine. And so that particular organization and all of their kind of competitors in our market sort of feel we have friendly feelings. They sort of feel like they contributed to my existence, and they appreciate having somebody to contact directly if they feel as though they're having a problem. Got it.
Last question here, and then thank you for my colleagues for tolerating all of them here. But I'm relatively new to, as a city commissioner here. I have been struck by the tremendous cost at times that the city has to go through for public records requests, the amount of resources that it absorbs. And it's really a phenomenal public policy balancing act, right? The need for transparency, the press's entitlement to dig into issues and to get prompt response, concerned citizens' ability to dig in on the one hand, but on the other, just tremendous cost to the city in both time spent and dollars. I think we just approved 3 FTEs in the last budget cycle devoted just to public records, and it's real. When we'd like to be hiring fire and 911 dispatchers, I guess maybe just walk me through from your vantage point, since you've gotten into your position, how have you addressed managing the cost and the absorption of resources for the city of Atlanta in your role in trying to balancing those competing policy considerations? Sure.
So we have, as you have described, complying with public records laws is not cost neutral. And we are never, even with we have some cost recovery provisions in the Georgia Open Records Act. I'm not sure, I honestly haven't had a chance to look up your laws to see how similar or dissimilar they may be, but we're never going to even break even on the amount of resources that we expend in complying with these records laws. What I will say 100% is that litigation around Open Records Act compliance is way more costly than a transparency officer. And we've had considerable amounts of litigation around alleged noncompliance with the Open Records Act at the City of Atlanta. And so one of the things that I can do in my position is definitely address those issues that arise before it gets to that point where it does become extremely costly and time consuming. But also I am a resource for training and for advice and for brainstorming for those individuals within the city whose job responsibility includes complying with Open Records Act requests for their particular departments. And the city is very large, so we have actually designated an official records officer for each department, and each department is considered to be the custodian of its own requests. And so there are quite a few folks within the City of Atlanta who have this role, and it is a lot. And I tell them straight up, like, I sympathize, but there's not much we can do because we are required to comply with this law. And whether it's expensive and time consuming and frankly a pain in everybody's backside or not. And so my role does have the benefit of being able to kind of spread best practices out. So like if one department is doing something particularly well, I can, provide that information and kind of guidance on how to maybe implement that in other departments. Everybody has a different workflow because of the types of documents that they have and different levels of responsibility around finding them and how hard that might be. But it does seem to be helpful to have a place where those folks can say, hey, I've received this request. I'm really unsure about what to do with it, because I will tell you, in my experience over 22 years, the places where we have not complied with the law and gotten really smacked for it are places where people just weren't sure what to do. They didn't want to do the wrong thing, and so they did nothing. And that's real. That's very human. It's sort of a paralyzing situation when you get a request that's completely confusing and you're really not sure what to do with it. Having somebody in a role like mine, where they can pick up the phone or send me an email, or we can jump on a Teams meeting or whatever, and they have a chance to walk through it with me, and we can sort of parse it out and say, okay, this is what you should do first. This is how you should handle this piece. It is really helpful, and it kind of moves people off of the starting block. And just helps with prioritizing and making sure that they can get through all the things that they have to get through in order to comply with the law.
Appreciate it, and appreciate my colleagues indulging all those questions. Thank you very much for your testimony, Kristen.
You're welcome.
No, those were actually, that was a great conversation.
Yeah, no, it
Commissioner
was.
Ryan.
Thank you for that, Attorney Gonzalez. I appreciate it. I think I tracked this, Kristen, and I really loved your comments that you had authority only over your children and your dog. I would debate if you ever have authority over cats. That's just my experience. But the person who hired you was appointed by the mayor and then approved by council vote?
No, actually, so I was appointed by the mayor.
That's what I meant to say. I thought I said
so
that.
directly by the mayor, and then approved by council. And they took great pains. And let me just be really clear. I was the attorney who was tasked with drafting all of the ordinances and things like that. I never expected to be in this role. I was going to be that person's lawyer. But the mayor at the time, Keisha Bottoms, asked me to step into this role, and it's been fantastic. But so there were a lot of very deliberate thought when this position was being created about how to make it as independent as possible, because one of the issues that we were dealing with at the time was allegations of political interference with compliance with the Open Records Act. And so the way they did that was to have the the position appointed by the mayor. So the mayor has the discretion to appoint whoever he or she wants. And then the has to be confirmed by a majority vote of the city council. And then on the backside, whoever's sitting in my position cannot be removed without a written notice from the mayor and an approval of the council. So there's no way for someone to exert undue influence around how we comply with the Open Records Act.
No, thank you, Kristen, for confirming actually how you fit into the construct in the city of Atlanta. Appreciate it.
If I could ask one follow-up, I think I heard the answer there. Your position was created by ordinance, is that correct, not by charter?
I believe so. I would have to go back and check. It's been a minute. We created a new section of our code around transparency, and I'm fairly certain that that's where the authority for my position is. Our charter is
by
not.
ordinance,
Yeah.
then.
Yes, I believe it's by ordinance.
Okay, thank you. And you.
But our
do you-
charter is also amended by ordinance. It just takes a separate read.
Oh, that's interesting, too. So here's a question I have for you. You expressed the importance of independence, and actually on your website, it stresses the importance of independence, and I certainly agree with that. Do you believe that that has worked, even though your position was created by the mayor and the city council through ordinance? Do you believe you've remained an independent voice and a community advocate?
I do. I've been at the city for a very long time, and I can definitely say that I feel that my current position is much less firmly aligned in the operational / executive than I was when I was in the law department. There's a perception at the city of Atlanta that the law department works for the mayor, even though the city attorney is a dual report in our form of government. So we do have separate branches of government. We have the legislative branch and we have the executive branch. The city attorney reports actually to the mayor and the council. And that was another reason that my position was kind of left in the law department, because there on paper and in structure, there is more independence in the law department. But the perception at the city of Atlanta, because of the way government just works, quite frankly, where the executive branch is the one that usually, at least in our government, we have a strong mayor, weak council form of government. Those are not my words. That's the words in the law. And there's certainly nothing weak about our city council, but just by the nature of the way the city operates due to its construction, the executive branch is a little bit more active in proposing laws and things like that, where the law department has more of a public face. And so the perception is a little bit that the law department is more closely aligned with the executive branch. In my current role, I really do feel equally kind of just equally distributed, if there's a better word to say that. I'm not sure what it is, but I don't get the same sense that people look at me as representing the mayor that I did when I was in the law department.
Very good, thank you. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you, council, for your engagement. I appreciate your levity as well, Kristen. I'd like to invite Ginger to share her remarks now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to make remarks on this. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, and we can see you as well.
Okay, great. And I apologize for the background noise. It is dinner time here on the East Coast, so you will probably hear my children. My name is Ginger Quintero McCall, and I was Oregon's first public records advocate. I'm testifying today to voice my strong support for the Transparency Advocate proposal. In my role as Oregon's public records advocate, I had many responsibilities that were very similar to Portland's proposed Transparency Advocate, but on the state level. And in my time as advocate, I saw firsthand the problems that the city of Portland has with public records. I received numerous consistent complaints about the city's processing of public records requests, especially related to delays and excess fees being charged for providing records. As I noted in my own formal report, Portland's public records fee policy, charging a staff hourly rate plus up to 42% more to cover for employee benefits, stands out as exorbitant, even in a state where high public records fees are the norm. The city of Portland was in fact the most frequent subject of complaints I received as public records advocate. I believe that having an office that is tasked with studying Portland's specific public records practices and challenges and proposing solutions would be a great benefit to the city. This position would be complementary to the state's Public Records Advocate's Office, which focuses primarily on mediation and training. The Transparency Advocate could devote significantly more time to assessing Portland's public records processes and making nuanced suggestions for improvements in regular reports. These reports would be able to address systemic city-specific issues more easily than the State Public Records Advocate's Office, which is focused again on mediation of individual cases. Some public records issues, like confusion over the scope or the subject of a particular request, are more appropriate for individual mediation. But other issues, like the City of Portland's practice of charging excessive fees, are systemic issues that are more appropriate for study and evaluation in a report. Dealing with systemic issues individually over and over through mediation is inefficient and wastes both time and taxpayer dollars. Having a transparency advocate that focuses attention on city public records processes will greatly benefit public access. For city officials, just knowing that someone is exercising oversight regarding public records decisions will likely motivate better behavior and more responsive customer service. In my work as Oregon's public records advocate, I often found that simply calling a public official and inquiring about a public records decision was enough to motivate swift action. Oversight and accountability work to create better and more responsive government. As discussed earlier in this discussion, independence is important for this position. I saw this firsthand in my own experience as public records advocate. This office's placement in the auditor's office will help to ensure that independence and will make the transparency advocate an effective ombudsperson. I also want to second Kristen's statement about how a transparency office can assist citizens in their basic questions about public records and help to lower the temperature of a public records dispute. This office can offer basic information about public records requests, which is a great public service and will actually improve the quality of requests, which decreases time spent processing and may even decrease litigation. As Brian said, there's nothing radical about this proposal. Offices like this exist on local, state, and the federal level, including the Federal Office of Government Information Services and the National Archives, and the Public Records Advocate right here in Oregon. These offices have effectively and efficiently improved public access and, by extension, public trust. For these reasons, I would urge you to approve this proposal, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? Commissioner Ryan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ginger, for that testimony. I didn't catch how long you were in the role at the state of Oregon.
I was the public records advocate for a year and a half before I resigned because there was attempted political interference in the office. The office has since become independent through the legislature.
You said a year and a half. Did you say the start date, the end date? I didn't hear that.
I started in, I believe, April of 2018. And I left in September of 2019.
Thank you so much.
So I hate to ask, and if this is a sore subject, just tell me to stuff it. You said you left due to political interference. Can you give us, because I thought that's part of what this was trying to avoid. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened, unless this is a subject of litigation or something, in which case I'm happy to move on.
No, it's not a sore subject. It's actually easily discoverable information in many news media reports. The office was envisioned to be independent. So I was appointed by the governor's office with a clause, I believe, that said I could only be dismissed for cause, but I was to report to the Public Records Advisory Council, which was an independent body. It was composed of a mix of members of the requester community and members of government. The governor's office, despite telling the public and the legislature that this was meant to be an independent office, someone in her office basically let me know that what I should be doing is their bidding, potentially slowing down proposals that the governor's office did not like. The other complication for this office was that my budget still went through the Department of Administrative Services and the governor's side of the budgeting process. So, placed in this position where I felt like it was an impossible ethical position for me to be in, to not own up to the public that I was doing the governor's office bidding, to not own up to the council that I reported to, that was what I was doing. and basically to not be an independent office made it impossible for me to continue to function in that situation.
Thank you. It sounds like you were standing on principle, and I appreciate that. And thank you for sharing that. Commissioner Maps, you had a question for Ginger?
Ginger, thank you for your testimony today. I wasn't going to get into this, but as long as we did, I think I vaguely remember your tenure in that post. And I think even since you've left, at least in my casual observations, it seems like that office has continued to have some challenges. Could you unpack a little bit some of the sort of structural challenges or chronic challenges that that office at the state level here in Oregon seems to experience around transparency?
So I think, the challenges are, numerous. Obviously, public records disputes are numerous, and so you need to make sure you have adequate staffing and an adequate budget. The office needs to be independent, which I think putting it in the auditor's office is the correct location for it, in the city level. On the state level, I believe that they ended up just making it a separate independent office with a separate independent budget. But, you need to ensure the independence of the ombudsperson. The office needs to be adequately funded. And honestly, you have to find the person who is dispositionally well suited to that particular position. Someone who cares deeply about public records, someone who interacts well with the public, but also has trust with the government. I think that might be one of the biggest challenges, just finding someone who can meet those demands, because, the customer service aspect of it is really important. I think it's important for everyone in government to exercise good customer service because we serve the public. And having a disposition where you want to talk to people, you want to help people, I think is very important. So, staffing the office correctly, I think is a big challenge and an important one.
Thanks, Ms. McCall. No more questions.
I have one more question. And I appreciate this back and forth. This feels a little like a work session, which is what I'd hoped we'd have. You'd suggested at the city level, the auditor's office is the correct place to put this. We heard earlier from Kristen that in their executive form of government, it worked better for them under the executive. Why not, since we're talking about nothing less than a change to the city's governing documents, to our charter and the formal structure of our government, why not just have it be completely independent? Why have it report to any political officer?
I'm not an expert on Portland's particular form of government, so I can't really speak to whether or not that would be possible. The other piece of it is to get an office off the ground, and this was a real challenge, you have to have administrative support. And one thing that was very good about my office originally, so my office was situated with administrative support from the Secretary of State's office. And then the governor's office appointed me. So that separation was meant to create the independence. Unfortunately, the Secretary of State passed away and some of the protection that I had from that office was eliminated. But having the administrative support from that office was really essential for me to get my office off the ground. Just silly things like someone setting up a website for me, someone, teaching me the ropes of government and the budgeting process and how to submit a reimbursement request. I think that is the place where, the auditor's office, at least as a starting point, is a good place to start, to give this office the administrative support that it needs to succeed.
Good, and that makes sense. That's a thoughtful answer. I'm just sort of thinking in the structure of our government, even going forward, our Economic Development Agency is actually independent, has its own independent governance board. There are intersections with the city around budget and other areas, but with thought, there could be even more or true independence as we're discussing it here today. But I appreciate your testimony and your being here. Two other, Commissioner Maps, are you back on?
Yeah,
And
I
then
am
Commissioner
back on.
Rubio.
I was going to let Ms. McCall go, but actually I think she's a really important person for this council to talk to. Frankly, colleagues, when I think about this particular position, the metaphor, or at least one of the examples I look to, is the position that Ms. McCall used to hold at the state. So I've actually been kind of eager to pick your brain. I got two questions. One, you may not be in a good position to answer, but I'll ask anyway. Ms. McCall, do you have any opinion about the proper place to to create this office? As in, should this live in code or should this live in the charter? And I recognize that might not be your area of expertise, but if you have an opinion, I'd be interested in hearing it.
I don't really have a strong opinion other than if charter makes it a more permanent position, I would favor charter.
Okay. The second question I have is, we have I think we have a one-page proposal before us today, which just creates the office. In terms of actually defining the responsibilities, all that sort of administrative rules or whatever that is, how complicated is that? I'm trying to figure out what that looks like, who does that work, how much public engagement there should be around some of that back office stuff that really defines what you do on a day-to-day basis. Any insights there?
Yeah, so looking at the proposal, I think it's adequate for you to hire someone and for them to sort of run with this in a way that's effective. I mean, I don't think it's any more vague than the law that ended up creating, my former office. I think that there's enough here that this person sort of knows what their basic marching orders are, what they need to be working on. The job of this office is to take public complaints. It is to investigate complaints and potentially to issue reports and recommendations. And I think that is, given what I've seen of the city of Portland's public records problems, that will be an adequate amount of work for a full-time employee. So I think, if you get someone who is ambitious and cares about this a lot, this scope will be adequate.
Thank you, Ms. McCall. No more questions, I promise.
Commissioner Rubio.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. McCall, for being here. Really appreciate it. And it's been really great to hear your experience. My question is around capacity and staffing. And you mentioned a few times now how it's really important to fund it well and to ensure you have the staff necessary to do this job well and be responsive and effective. And I know you're not in a position to assess our capacity here at the city, but can you give us just an idea from your experience, maybe what consists of adequate capacity, how much staff, and what was a typical budget for something that you felt was enough, or was it even enough for your experience? Thank you.
So staffing wise, thank you for the question, by the way, and thank you everyone for the questions. I'm always happy to talk about public records. Staffing wise, I was the only person in my office for about the first 7 or 8 months, I think, before I hired my deputy, because it was just a slow hiring process. I had to get everything together. I had to do the interviews. And I think up until that point, it was probably adequate staffing. The one really resource heavy thing that my office did that this office will not be doing is the mediation. The mediation is very resource heavy. For us, the training was very resource heavy because I was expected to train throughout the state, which, if I'm over on the other side of Oregon, if I'm, off on the eastern side of the state, it's much harder for me to do mediation, right? So I would be kind of spread very thin that way. I think at least to start off, having one full-time employee who's fully devoted to this transparency advocate position will be adequate, provided that that person has the kind of administrative support that the auditor was talking about earlier coming from the auditor's office. Someone to help out with the websites, someone to help out with IT support, those sorts of things. I think one person is adequate for the time being. If you end up finding that you need someone else, then potentially you could change that. But I think starting off, having one transparency advocate, I think that would be adequate given the description that I saw in the proposal and given, the work that I did.
Commissioner Gonzalez has another, and thank you so much for being here and answering our questions.
Ms. McCall, just a benchmark, are you aware of any other Portland or Oregon cities that have adopted a transparency advocate, and what does that look like in those cities?
I am not, but I have to be honest, I haven't really kept up on sort of the nuances of Portland's public records work since my departure.
But okay, but you're not, are you aware of any similar position in Oregon, any other cities in Oregon that have adopted a transparency advocate?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
I'm aware of, these positions existing on state levels. I know that there's one, I believe in Arizona and Maryland, several other states. That was what the Public Records Advocate, the state Public Records Advocate, was based on, was these other models. And then there's also the Office of Government Information Services on the federal level.
If I could comment on that last question, this would be a first for Portland, and I believe a first for Oregon in terms of leading in the area of transparency. And that's consistent with the legacy of the auditor's office and our institution. I want to thank Kristen and Ginger so much for their testimony, and each of you council members for your engagement on this issue. I think I can say with confidence that you have a clearer understanding of the value that this type of position would bring to our city and its residents, and particularly the benefits that it offers council offices and city bureaus alike. I want to reiterate why it makes sense for my office to implement this proposal with help from a very special guest, former Multnomah County Auditor and former Portland City Auditor, LaVon Griffin-Vallad.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. That was a very interesting discussion. But anyway, I should introduce myself. Good afternoon, commissioners. I'm LaVon Griffin-Vallad, and as Simone mentioned, I was the former Multnomah County Auditor, and then I became the city auditor. And I was the city auditor from 2009 through 2014. And it's nice to be here today among friends and former colleagues and members of the public. I want you to know that I don't have the experience that the two professionals who just testified in front of me do on this matter, but and some of that is because I've been kept busy these past years since leaving office. And I've authored 4 novels set in Eastern Oregon. But I'm not here today to hawk my books. I came to ask you this. I want a show of hands, please. Who does not like transparency? Okay, all right, nary a hand went up. Transparency is critical for effective and well-functioning governance. And I'm proud the city of Portland has had a set of transparency tools via the Independent City Auditor's Office built into this institution for more than a century. Among those tools are performance audits, oversight of annual financial audits, and the independent ombuds function. The transparency advocate position was recommended by a majority of members of the Charter Review Commission and is modeled after similar transparency functions at the state of Oregon, as you know, and the state of Arizona, as well as the city of Atlanta and the city of Toronto, both of which have auditors' offices similar to the city of Portland. The transparency advocate would be the point of contact to manage transparency and records-related issues. More broadly, the transparency advocate's role would include the examination of other areas of transparency related to public records law. Regarding the city attorney's role in records-related matters, I'd like to note that the city of Portland is the sole client and interest of the city attorney's office. Having a transparency advocate within the city auditor's office would provide Portlanders with an impartial body that addresses their public records concerns. The city attorney is not in the position to provide those services to community members and organizations. Finally, I'd like to applaud our new city auditor for her courage in moving forward with this ask for greater transparency, reportedly in the face of some resistance from council. That shows she has guts, and you want a gutsy auditor on your side and on the city's side. Thank you for your time. That's all I have to say today. Now, if you have any questions of me, feel free to ask.
Thank you, and it's good seeing you. Thank you for being
Good
here
seeing
today.
you too, Tim.
Thank you, Levon. I want to thank all of you again for taking the time to engage in this very important discussion and for taking this proposal seriously. I hope that this presentation has clarified the purpose of the Transparency Advocate proposal, where it came from, why it matters, and how it will be implemented. Beyond that, I hope that this presentation has shown you that referring this charter amendment to voters will put Portland on the leading edge of transparency, where it belongs, and further on the path of an inclusive and responsive government. I ask that you consider the confines of our new system and not the one we are working to transform today, and let this be your lasting contribution to our city's continued growth. I would like to thank our community members for their oral and written testimony, our speakers for sharing their wisdom with us, and the voters for pushing all of us to do better. With that, I would like to remind you that the Transparency Advocate proposal has touched many hands. It originated from community organizations. It was advanced by the Charter Review Commission and refined by my office with input from technical experts in and outside of the city. I request that you refer this measure to Portlanders for their consideration in May. I would like to thank my Chief Deputy Auditor, Reed Broderson, for his multidisciplinary dedication, and the rest of my team for lending their legal, budget, and policy expertise to this endeavor. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler, and thank you, Commissioners, for your consideration and your continued input. Finally, I ask that if there are amendments to this proposal, that I please have the opportunity to comment as the elected official who referred this measure to you and the leader who is charged with implementing it.
Very good. Thank you. And does that complete your presentation? Did you have invited testimony, or are we just going right to the public testimony?
Those were my guests, so if there is public testimony, I can take a seat.
Very good. Thank you. And
We
so
have-
the council clerk will call people in turn, 3 minutes each, please, and if you could just state your name for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. First up, we have Michael Mills.
Welcome.
Michael's joining us online.
Thank you, Mayor, City Commissioners, Madam Auditor. This is Michael Mills. I reside in Mount Hood, Oregon. I'm here today to support the establishment of the Transparency Advocate within the Auditor's Office. I worked within the public ombudsman community for most of my career. First as ombudsman for the municipality of Anchorage, and more recently, I served as the city's first ombudsman under Mayor Vera Katz. I then became the city's first statutory ombudsman in the city auditor's office under Gary Blackmer. I served twice as president of the U.S. Ombudsman Association. Portland had visionary leaders like former U.S. Attorney Sid Lezak, one of the founders of the alternative dispute resolution movement in Oregon, who advocated for a city ombudsman. He and Mayor Katz believed that an independent function would promote equity and efficiency in the provision of government services. Mayor Katz believed that the city needed to be more accountable to its residents, especially those who were unempowered. Not everyone can pick up the phone and call their elected officials and expect them to speak with them. Independent offices, such as Ombudsman and Transparency Advocate, ensure that their voices are heard, as well as those voices that are not speaking through the Ombudsman or Transparency Advocate's systemic investigations. My ancestors played a significant role in the building of the city of Portland. Cooch, Mills, Ainsworth, Pettit, Ledbetter all helped shape Portland. However, they were also complicit in the promotion and continuation of racism and privilege in Portland and in Oregon that remains with us today. I acknowledge these injustices and the role my family members played in them. I'm always looking for ways to right these wrongs and make Portland and Oregon more just. Providing the Transparency Advocate furthers this objective of fair, just, and accountable government. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Jude Al-Ghazal-Stone.
Hi, Jude.
Hi. Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jude Al-Ghazal-Stone, and I appreciate this opportunity to testify on behalf of the ACLU of Oregon. We ask that you refer the establishment of a transparency advocate in the City of Portland's charter to the voters this May. Over the past years, Portland has unfortunately developed a reputation for secrecy. There are several issues that emphasize our city's need for a transparency advocate within the auditor's office: lack of community trust, lack of transparency, inefficiency, and inequity. We've heard from Portlanders that public trust in our city government is very low. People pay attention to what's happening in their city, and they see that the city has been subject to multiple lawsuits regarding public records practices, countless district attorney opinions, and headline after headline about secrecy and missing or hidden records. Community partners with long histories of civic engagement have reported their struggle to locate and communicate with the correct party when public records and information aren't made available, a process that proves even harder for members of marginalized communities who might not have the requisite time or resources and who are impacted by government decisions even more disproportionately. Our coalition first submitted the Transparency Advocate proposal and testimony to the Charter Commission in 2021, and the Madam Auditor has taken that draft considered by the Commission and conducted thorough rounds of outreach, vetting, revision, and legal review to ensure that this position will be effective. And especially as the city navigates the new charter government in the months ahead, there has never been a more critical time to establish a transparency advocate in Portland. This proposal offers a multitude of benefits for both the people and government employees of Portland. The advocate will fill a critical role that is currently missing from our government, because not only will they be able to investigate individual instances of inefficiency or inaccessibility, but they'll also be able to provide support and best practices expertise to make systemic improvements in how our city works. And by doing so, the advocate will also increase people's access to public information, help the city embody its core value of transparency. The transparency advocate will also act as a government third party to resolve conflicts between city employees and Portland residents. So rather than advocating for any one side, this person will simply advocate for good governance. By letting both employees and residents voice their concerns, the advocate will help diffuse tension, promote understanding, and uphold best governance practices. The people of Portland have made it clear that they're ready for change when they overwhelmingly elected the city's new charter government with a 15-point lead. And as elected representatives of these voters, it's critical that you listen to what they're saying, that they're advocating for a stronger, more transparent democracy in Portland. So we hope you'll demonstrate your commitment to transparency by sending this proposal to the voters in May. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Kate Titus.
Hi, Kate.
Hello, Mayor Wheeler, City Commissioners, nice to see you. My name is Kate Titus, and I'm here to testify on behalf of Common Cause. And as most of you know, Common Cause is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works for open, honest, and accountable government. Common Cause is national in scope, works in all 50 states at all levels of government. And our Oregon office is actually just a few blocks from Portland City Hall. What you may not know is that in the 1970s, Common Cause helped pass sunshine laws across the country, requiring that government meeting records be open to the public. And we continue to advocate for government transparency today. So here's what I'd like to add to the record and have you consider. I trust that each of you is personally committed to your role in ensuring transparency in city government. Absolutely. Nevertheless, I think it's fair to say that despite intentions, it's not always easy to deliver on that responsibility. Currently, Portland has a poor reputation for government transparency. And of course, some argue that that failure is on your watch. Both the blame and the burden of Portland's transparency challenges get placed at your doorstep. When systems are overloaded, you and your offices deal with the extra workload. And when there's a breakdown in city government transparency, whether it's real or just perceived, the failure is seen as your failure, often putting you at odds with aggrieved constituencies, be it public interest groups, journalists, or voters. So this proposal would actually change that dynamic by better resourcing your leadership on transparency. As we've seen at the state level here in Oregon and in cities like Atlanta and Toronto, a dedicated transparency advocate creates an ability to proactively improve systems, get ahead of problems, and lend extra capacity to support you and your offices in leading and dealing with a fluctuating transparency workload. And also ultimately, of course, by keeping government transparent and avoiding scandals, it also builds public trust. I want to add that Common Cause Oregon has been involved in vetting and giving input on this proposal, both initial proposal to the city charter mission and fuller proposal that the auditor has developed for your consideration today. This is by both our state and national staff who have expertise on this issue. We do have some concern that you or the city attorney seem to be considering ways to weaken the authority of the transparency advocate, and I hope that you won't go further in that direction. But regardless, we strongly support the proposal that's in front of you, and we urge you to send it to the voters. Thank you for considering my testimony.
Thank you, Kate.
Next up, we have Debbie Kay.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Wheeler, Commissioners, and Madam Auditor. I am Debbie Kay, President of the League of Women Voters of Portland. I'm glad to speak to this issue again. It is very important to have a transparency advocate for the city of Portland. This is a position that the League has, if you will, advocated for throughout the charter amendment process. The League wholeheartedly supports Auditor Reddy's proposal for a charter amendment referral that would create the position of transparency advocate in her office. The city adopted transparency as one of its core values in 2020. Now is the time to turn words into action. All Portlanders and city employees will benefit from a transparency advocate to provide assistance in finding information. To be effective, this advocate needs the authority to conduct investigations and issue reports. As an organization that promotes active and informed participation in government, the League works to fully understand issues before acting. We monitor city boards and commissions and study informational documents produced by city bureaus. At times, however, information such as minutes, agendas, and meeting materials, this information is not posted in a timely manner or publicly available at all. We understand that sometimes these oversights could be due to staff overload. A transparency advocate could assist community members and bureau staff in resolving these types of issues cooperatively. The city often engages, furthermore, in lengthy efforts to develop new policies or plan new development projects. The League believes the public should be involved in those discussions and deliberations from the beginning. There are times, however, when the public doesn't even hear about these projects until they are near completion. A transparency advocate has the potential to instill in city bureaus the importance of making the public aware of these undertakings so they can follow them from the start and provide informed feedback to decision makers. Transparency is important to the League as a matter of principle and as a practical matter. A transparency advocate embedded in the charter will ensure there is someone who appreciates the importance of access to information and whose purpose is to foster a culture of openness and also intervene in individual cases. We urge your support for referring this charter amendment to the voters. It is time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Kay Rambo.
Welcome, Kay.
Hi, I'm Kay Rambo, Editor-in-Chief of Street Roots, Vice President of the Greater Oregon Society of Professional Journalists, and a proud Portlander, though I'm here in my capacity with SPJ. Mayor and Commissioners, thank you for taking the time to hear public testimony on this item. I hope this is more than a performative attempt at appearing to consider the public's will in your deliberations today, as appears to be the case based on a story published by the Oregonian last night. First, I'd like to respond to some of the claims made by commissioners and staff in that article, most notably the claim that this measure didn't receive public input. As you heard from Charter Commissioners and Auditor Rady, this proposal did receive public input. It was vetted by the auditor. It did undergo legal review, and it is based on existing best practices. I know it received public input in part because I'm one of the people who testified before the Charter Commission. Regarding attempts to paint this measure as a last-minute effort, I'll simply point out that adding a transparency advocate was first proposed to the commission last June, then reintroduced in October before receiving public testimony in November and December. The coalition working on the measure first contacted Commissioner Ryan for a meeting on January 11th. The measure was first added to a city council agenda on January 13th. It was then presented to the council with public testimony on January 19th. I know this because I'm one of the people who testified. As I said on the 19th, and will reiterate now, Portland desperately needs a transparency advocate. As it currently stands, Portland has among the worst public record systems of all major cities in the United States. It is costly, opaque, inefficient, and subject to the whims of public officials acting in bad faith. The same can be said for public meetings protocol. That issue only becomes more problematic when Portland transitions to a more centralized form of government. In my capacity as an SPJ board member, I regularly hear complaints about the city's public record and meetings practices. As a journalist who's extensively covered police accountability and homelessness policy in the city, I have plenty of my own complaints. A long list of costly lawsuits, news stories, and DA orders are strong evidence that I know what I'm talking about. And to be quite honest, whether you agree the city needs to address its longstanding issues with public records and meeting laws should be secondary. Same with if you believe that the public should simply trust you when filing a public records request. Lost in the fray here seems to be that you're not voting for or against a law today. You're not even voting for or against creating an office of the transparency advocate. You're voting for or against what is supposed to be the truest form of public engagement in a democracy, voting. You owe it to the voters, both present and future, to give them the choice on a transparency advocate. Thank you.
Kay, could I ask you a question? And I appreciate your testimony, first of all. This is Ted, if you can't see me.
Yep.
So there's a bit of a difference here in that the council's not being asked to vote on an ordinance and go through our usual process of voting on and vetting an ordinance through a first and a second reading and all of that. We're being asked to refer a fundamental change to the document governing the city of Portland, the charter. And you heard that that's somewhat unusual even compared to some of the testimony we heard today. And I'm sure you would agree that if something goes out to the voters and it says a proposal to increase transparency of the city of Portland and investigate elected officials or whatever it's going to say, I don't know what the language will be, and I don't pretend to know, it's pretty certain it's going to pass, right? So let's assume that that's probably the case, that it would likely pass. Therefore, wouldn't you agree with me that it is important that we get this right?
Well, I don't think that question really makes sense. I mean, if you think that something
let me
represents the will of voters, why would that make you less likely to?
I'll tell you why. I'll give you a very specific example. So referenced earlier in our conversation today was a charter reform that the prior auditor brought to City Council in 2017, all those years ago. And we enthusiastically embraced sending a reform out to the voters. It was supported. We're still debating the details today. And a few weeks after that reform went to the ballot and it was supported with the blessing, presumably of the City Council that referred it, we had a lack of clarification on who had budgetary authority over the auditor's office. And that still has not been resolved to this very day. So I'll just be honest with you and tell you that weighs on me. I want to make, from my perspective, I won't speak for the council, I want to have all the questions answered. And I asked a few questions that in my mind are still open questions about getting this right. So I just wanted to test you whether my voting for this specific proposal and all of the I's, the way they're dotted and the T's, the way they're crossed, is this a proxy for whether I believe in transparency or not?
I mean, that's up to the voters. My personal opinion is that you, as the mayor and the commissioners, clearly have potentially a vested interest in limiting accounts for transparency. And I guess going back to what you said previously, I can't speak to how prior measures or reforms were crafted. I can't speak to this one, which I know was crafted carefully. It was crafted based on, again, existing best practices. It's gone through a number of experts, and from a variety of positions, right? Journalists, open government advocates, school board members, Attorneys, the people who have been involved in this process know what they're doing. They've done their research. And that's really all I can offer.
And that's fair. And you proffered yourself as somebody who's been involved in this process from the beginning. So there's one question that's still sort of outstanding in my mind amongst others. We've heard this referenced several times today as being sort of a no-brainer. And yet, when it came before the Charter Commission, they did not refer this to the voters amongst all of the other myriads of complicated proposals that they referred to the public. Instead, they referred it to City Council for further refinement and deliberation. Why did they do that?
Yeah, well, and first of all, I'll clarify, I haven't been a member of this coalition since the beginning. I've monitored it and was added in the fall. But I guess to speak to your question, the point of referring it to City Council, as I understand, I mean, in addition to the fact that it was not revisited by the Charter Commission until late in their efforts, was to open up a process of collaboration between the city and the people, trying to implement this measure. So I don't think it's based on a lack of certainty, but based on an understanding that there needs to be an amount of collaboration and working together to ensure that this makes sense legally and from, a legislative perspective.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks for answering my questions and thanks for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Michael Anderson. Is Michael here? Okay. Let's move on. James Posey.
Welcome, Mr. Posey.
Yeah, thank you. My name is James Posey, and what I'd like to say is whether it's running for mayor or pushing for equity in city contracting or other matters, I spent a large chunk of my 77 years on the earth trying to make the city better. Today, I urge you to refer the transparency advocate measure to the May ballot so Portland voters will have an opportunity to approve it. As our society has gotten more complicated, polarized, public trust is essential. Transparency breeds equity, fairness. Right now, it seems like sometimes you almost have to have a hired lobbyist or a lawyer to find out what's really going on in our city. We hold this city dear for its all this wonderful things it's done, but at the end of the day, we do need a transparency advocate. In a city where there's countless staffers devoted to telling the public what elected officials and city managers want the public to know, it's time for one single position to be devoted to helping the public access information the public wants to know. This is a small investment that will pay off. I believe you all should refer this, you should say yes on referring this. And let me just add that as a citizen, I am very proud of our audit, our auditors and the audit process in this city. Oftentimes when we come up here and have this discussion with you all, we feel like we don't have anybody that really represents us. I can tell you the previous auditor, she was fantastic. And it sounds like this auditor is following in that same lead. And really, those of us who go to bed at night weren't wondering whether or not we do have representation. We've always looked to the auditor's office as a kind of counterweight to all the other situations that go on. I could give you particular incidents where we've gone to the auditor's office. The ombudsman has helped us, give us some sense that we really belong and that we have some power within the city as citizens. And so I urge you to build upon that with our auditor's office. And really, I really respect these people. And thank them for their service, and I just want to add my voice to this process to get a transparency advocate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Posey. Appreciate your testimony.
Next up, we have Kai McMurtry online. Kai, you're muted.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, loud and clear.
Thank you. Thanks for taking my testimony. I'll be very brief. I'm just here representing myself as a resident of Portland and wanted to add my name to the record, asking you to advance this measure to voters. It seems as obvious as could be that if we want to put to walk the walk, that we should advance a measure regarding transparency to the most transparent and equitable democratic process we have, which is simply the ballot box. I think the experts and advocates have made a strong case. I am not an expert, but I'm happy to advocate on behalf. If, as has already been said, Portland truly believes in transparency and not just a performative tenant or so forth, you should advance this measure to voters. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Emily Harris online.
Hi, thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to join you. My name is Emily Harris. I'm a board member with Open Oregon, one of the original coalition members supporting this proposal. Open Oregon is an educational and charitable organization, and we have a single mission to assist and educate the general public, students, educators, public officials, media, and legal professionals to understand and exercise their rights to open government and their rights and responsibilities under Oregon law. We have heard that some council members are considering voting against the proposal. Through direct conversations and through public statements, we've heard several different reasons, which I'd like to address. First, we've been asked, what is the specific problem? The problem is that in repeated experience over years, people who run into obstacles trying to get legitimate, lawfully available information don't have anyone to turn to for help, not just in solving their own problems, but to improve the system. I have an addendum to this testimony that's focused mainly on records that I'll submit as well. But here's one example. Written testimony submitted to this council before a vote is taken on an issue, it's not publicly available. It's posted a week or so later. The problem isn't specifically that. The problem is that nobody has noticed that that's a transparency thing, and let alone tried to fix it. This position of transparency advocate would be able to notice things. They'd be able to fix things that might feel small, but that actually create obstacles, which in turn create unequal access to participation in government. In addition, this person would have the authority to get to the bottom of problems. A second example is that when public agencies don't post agendas or minutes, even when one of our coalition member groups pointed out that problem to an agency, the agency still didn't change its practice. Portland's transparency advocate would need tools to be taken seriously in City Hall. And this leads to a second concern that we've heard. It's directly related to the word investigate. Last Friday, Commissioner Ryan's office suggested that the word investigate be replaced with the word review. We shared back the fact that the language and the authority proposed for this position is actually identical, word for word, to the Ombudsman Office, which is a familiar and known office in this city. And this came out of the Ombudsman Office originally recognizing they didn't have the capacity to tackle what's needed for this fundamental piece of democracy, overseeing transparency. I do want to thank you, Commissioner Ryan, because you were very present and very engaged when you led the January 19th council meeting when the auditor first brought this proposal. But I do want to respectfully suggest that keeping consistent language is important, and also keeping some kind of backbone in this position is important. What does investigate mean? It means, yes, acting on specific legitimate complaints when needed, but ultimately it means having the last resort authority if needed to be able to dig into the bottom of any situation relevant to transparency and advocacy. People have referenced the values declaration made on June 17th, 2020, a very emotional time. Mary Wheeler, you said at that time, this is not performative. This is your opportunity to put words into action. Thank you very much. I may get cut off, but I will also say I have been here from the beginning and can answer some of your questions about our perception of why the Charter Commission did what they did. And I also am a member of the Public Records Advisory Council, which Ginger referenced. And if you are interested in the future and learning more about that state office and how it runs, or now, I'm happy to try to answer your questions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. We appreciate it.
Next up, we have Stephanie Stewart.
Hello, Mayor Wheeler and City Commissioners. My name is Stephanie Stewart, and for 13 years, I served as the Land Use Chair for the Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association. More than 10 years ago, I proposed that Council direct from the top down a transparency-first approach to governance and daily operations in the city. I'm thrilled to see this proposal for Transparency Advocate finally come to fruition. I believe this proposal can make transparency a practice and not just a platitude here in Portland. My 2010 proposal came about after the Neighborhood Association wanted to look at a bid for a water bureau project. A colleague and I spent 2 hours reading a document in a water bureau conference room. We found 8 pages we wanted copies of. We waited an extra hour for those copies and were not given the copies. Instead, at the 3-hour mark, we were handed a bill for almost $60. This was not an isolated incident. Our public information requests were regularly met with responses that would surprise most citizens. I feel that with my education and the fact that I actually have some skin to spare, if I can't access public records, I'm not sure who can. Inspired by our experiences, I researched the city's stated goals for information access and our local practices, and I looked at policies from many other jurisdictions. I concluded that Portland's transparency policies lag behind those of its peers, fell short of our community's values, and could use a number of reforms. 12 years later, this is still true. A transparency advocate is an investment in sunlight for government. As a citizen, it isn't possible to get enough traction to make the complicated work of systemic reform possible. This issue requires one dedicated mind empowered to help the city move forward, to analyze and propose solutions, to respond to requests for help, and to improve bureau culture. This work is too complicated to be just one item among many in an employee's job description. And it's also too important to be put off any longer. It's important to remember that in delegating authority to city officials, the citizens of Portland do not give away to their public servants the right to decide what is and isn't good for them to know. But this is the accidental default with Portland's existing model of public information sharing. As someone who cares about this city and is among those who have tested the city's records access practices enough to know that they fall short of our values, I heartily endorse the proposal for an independent, impartial transparency advocate. You know already that Portlanders value civic engagement, and information about our city workings is essential to foster this vibrant civic life that characterizes Portland. Please refer this public discussion to the people for the ballot in May. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next up, we have Ashley Henry.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi, good afternoon, Mayor. Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to provide my testimony. My name is Ashley Henry. I live in Southeast Portland, and I'm testifying as a private citizen. The last time I testified before the council, I was the outgoing executive director of an organization called Business for a Better Portland. And the testimony that I provided that day about the public process that I had gone through as a member of Prosper Portland's Budget Advisory Committee is very relevant to today's conversation. And since Commissioner Gonzalez was not elected at that time, I hope that he will pay particular attention to what I am going to say. The organization that we founded was based on the belief that if citizens and small business owners and others were simply to be more informed and engaged and had the opportunity to provide input to city government, that things could change in a way that would be more positive for small business owners and for the community at large. And over the 6 years that I served in that role, I was a diligent participant in every civic engagement process that our city offers. And the most particular that I mentioned was the city's budget advisory council that was provided by Prosper Portland. Back in the fall, I shared how over the 3 years of serving on that body, I learned an enormous amount from the staff of Prosper Portland, and I witnessed how they, over time, were incredibly responsive to public input. And by public input, I mean the head of the Columbia River Corridor Association, the head of our 42nd Avenue, someone from a neighborhood business district, someone from a culturally specific organization, all of whom served on these committees. And what I learned is that none of that mattered, because at the end of the day, our recommendations, no matter how engaged and quite frankly responsive the city staff were, it all boiled down to the referral of the budget to the mayor's office and everything that happened inside the mayor's office. And my conclusion is that until we have a transparency officer, we as citizens should not waste our time being involved in city efforts, because as individual citizens, as small businesses, if you do not have a paid lobbyist in city council tracking things day to day and influencing the outcomes of votes, you don't matter. And I really would love to see this vote today demonstrate that you actually don't believe that is true. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Mary Pavito.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Pivito. I'm a resident of Old Town, founder of the nonprofit Neighbors for Clean Air. Thank you, Mayor, and all the members of the City Council for allowing me this opportunity to speak to you today. I've been working for over a dozen years to reduce harmful air pollution in our Portland neighborhoods, and I started this work in the relative narrow confines of my Northwest Portland neighborhood and Chapman Elementary School community of parents and neighbors. Our first battles were made all the more acute and difficult because while many of us didn't know that the problem existed, the entities charged with the oversight of pollution most certainly did. And access to full information has been critical to achieving the advancements we've made for clean, safe air in our communities. But too often we don't know what we don't know. So I'll note my name's been conjured in more than one active FOIA request due to my persistent pursuit of decision makers to achieve clean air. And that's in part why I'm here in support of your vote to move this proposal to the ballot. It is fair for the public to know who is being listened to and why. In governance, in a democracy, we're tasked with serving all with equal consideration, and lack of transparency only feeds the worst intentions and sometimes serves only the wildest imaginations. It's through sunshine that we can truly obtain the factual information that drives us to the best solutions and separate it from the interests that are being served and the why. In my work, I've always sought that truth, the why of reticence, obstinance, and outright opposition to achieving clean air in our communities, because every authentic barrier, technical, legal, economic, is the problem to be solved to achieve the outcomes we desire. But not if you don't have the truth, not if a talking point of opposition is just a fulfillment of one narrow set of interests, or not if the leaders that I elect and the government that my taxes support don't respect me enough, have confidence in my capabilities to share those truths. It's not that I expect to have a seat at the table or to be directly involved in decisions that are made there, but I do believe I'm entitled to hear the conversations in full. Nothing is more true than this in the world of shaping the policies that shape our lives. And I'd argue that one of the great strengths of Portland has been the involvement of the people who live here. Flawed as we may be at times, there seems to be no city in the country that has a stronger track record per capita volunteerism, whether that's in the legacy of neighborhood associations in our schools, cleanup crews on our city streets, pop-up community meals, or serving the vast network of nonprofits. People of Portland deserve to know what is behind the decisions that affect us. If we don't know the truth, we'll make up our own or waste our energy working against forces that don't exist. Democracy are not businesses with proprietary secrets to be protected. I urge you to send this concept to the voters so as to establish the position of officer of transparency to enable everyone equal access to the information that shapes our lives. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mary.
Next up, we have Alyssa Vitale.
Hi, my name is Alyssa Vitale. Mayor Wheeler and City Council, I urge you to refer the transparency advocate question to voters. This is the morally right thing to do to ensure the city actually works for everyone and not just the select few who already have money and influence. As stated in the resolution, this recommendation also aligns with the city's core values of equity and transparency, core values that council approved in 2020 after they, I believe, were introduced by you, Mayor Wheeler. It's high time to live up to those values today. The Mercury reported that Mayor Wheeler's office and other commissioners have pushed back on this proposal due to a concern about the lack of public engagement on the issue. I share your concern that the public should be more and not less engaged in city government. However, I find the council raising concerns about public engagement on this particular issue only to be farcical and hypocritical, since public opinion has so frequently been ignored. Where was the concern for public engagement when thousands of Portlanders wrote letters and dozens testified against the downtown clean and safe contract renewal? Where was the concern for public engagement after we asked for the city's review on enhanced services districts, which has ground to a standstill? Where was the concern for public engagement when hundreds testified against the proposed mass camps? During that particular hearing, I actually recall dozens of community members were forced to take a back seat to sharing their opinions because Commissioner Ryan's office discreetly bumped several real estate developers to the top of the public testimony list. When a concern for public engagement and transparency is selective to specific issues, I can't help but see that as performative. I find it disrespectful to those of us who are trying to live a full life in this city without having special access to your offices. And after all, isn't letting the entire city vote on this issue the ultimate form of public engagement? If there's nothing to hide, you shouldn't be worried about more transparency. Do the right thing and refer this to voters. Thank you.
Alyssa, could I ask you a follow-up question? And thank you. I'm struck that a number of the examples that people are using today in support of additional transparency were examples that were freely available in the media. I mean, there already was transparency on most of the examples that people have brought forward today, and I just want to identify that as kind of interesting. But my question is this: given what you're proffering as a more or less complete distrust of the city council when it comes to issues of transparency and accountability, why do you think the Independent Charter Review Commission forwarded this to the council for review rather than what they could have done and did with several even more complicated issues, which was refer it to the ballot directly, bypass the council, go right to the people?
Sure. I mean, you're asking me to hypothesize about how these people felt when they referred this to you, and I don't think I can speak to that.
All right, that's fair.
Yeah, I appreciate you asking me, but you're asking me to make a conjecture about something that I can't speak to.
Very good. I appreciate your testimony. Thank you.
Our last testifier is Benjamin.
Hello.
Hi, Benjamin.
Hey. I think I stand apart from the other testifiers today. I really don't think transparency in this way is a good idea. You know, it was only recently I realized that I belong to a dark money lobbying organization. And when I approached the auditor's office in the past about ESDs and they had no knowledge about it, and I specifically got people to write in testimonies from the unhoused community to the auditor's office before they did the review, their annual review, before, you know, ambushing Mary at public meetings in order to ask questions about the ESDs that they had really no knowledge about, and really lobbying inappropriately to them over and over and over until they realized that there had actually been no information on ESDs for the past 20 years. You know, I realized that that was inappropriate. And I realized that when they were really aggressively pushing that and they got dismantled, you know, it cost them their jobs. And when I worked with Ginger McCall, and she was working on the economic improvement districts of Oregon, and I asked her about the ESDs as well, and she was forced to resign, that was inappropriate of me. And when I worked with the ESD coordinator, and he was forced to resign after completely and absolutely deconstructing ESDs in all their essences and forms, specifically the Portland Business Alliance, and he had to walk out, I realized that I was costing people their jobs. And transparency is not good for the city. It's bad for the city. It will cost you your jobs. After all, you don't want to end up like Seattle, where they're forced to show that they had to delete text. But what if you never had to delete those texts because the public had no access to it? You see? Do you see? I think that is the way to go. Shut it down. After all, we want to protect the most privileged in our city. The people in the Wells Fargo Center, where, the first case of COVID in Multnomah County happened, they introduced it, but whatever. Forget about that, The people in the bank building, the Pink Bank building, people in the World Trade Center, my peers and their fellow dark money lobbying organizations, they need to be protected. And who protects you? Them. So if you can't protect them, who's going to protect y'all? So just make sure you do the right thing for sustainable careers. Turn this down. Make sure the voters never see it, right? That is the smart thing to do. We're not talking about the good thing to do, the moral thing, the ethical, forget that, right? Nobody said there has to be a good democracy, just said it has to vaguely appear like a democracy. So do the right thing. I urge you, as a private citizen in this city who does not want to be held accountable, does not want to be investigated for maybe my thousands of hours of lobbying to different council members, like the PBA, my fellow peers, that's inappropriate for the public to know because they are the go-getters. They're the ones who run this city. The World Trade Center, PG, those folks, they run this city, not us. What do we care? What do we know? Nothing. So do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
That completes testimony.
Very good. Colleagues, I will entertain discussion on this item. I'll go first then.
Okay.
Commissioner Maps.
I have some questions for the auditor.
Madam Auditor, could you come back up? Thank you.
Madam Auditor, thank you for both this proposal and the testimony we're heard today. I'm actually very open to this particular idea. At the same time, I have some questions about the process that was used to get here and maybe some of the details. So if I could just run through a couple of quick questions that'll help grant my understanding of where we're at. Madam Auditor, what's your understanding of why the Charter Commission didn't just send this directly to the voters?
I would love to reiterate why I think that was. I think I laid that out in my opening remarks, that there was an intentional decision not to reach a unanimous vote of support to go directly to voters so that council would engage in discussion and work with the proponents of this proposal. I think I've highlighted the opportunities that were public for the community and council to engage on this. And the last time I brought this to you for discussion was on January 19th. My office has worked really quickly with everyone, every representative from your office, and trying to get your feedback. And in our initial stages, we did receive thumbs up. But as soon as the materials came to the agenda, that's when we started facing resistance.
Well, I think part of my feedback, I actually am supportive of this particular proposal. I think part of my feedback in the exchange that at least I've had with your office was that, this looks interesting. I sure would like to see more of a public engagement process on this. Can you tell us both what public engagement process you use, to develop this, what public engagement the Charter Review Commission used to develop this proposal?
Well, I did go over that. I noted 4 different meetings. And I want to note also that the Charter Commission that was appointed in 2022 is a 20-member commission that is appointed by the city council.
Yeah.
All of their information is publicly available. I'm happy to reiterate why this needs to be a charter reform and not an ordinance, and that's because.
Well, that's a
as I
different
s-
question.
can
I was
I-
actually kind of more, I'm trying to get at the,
Well, I'm trying to say that this came through the charter review process, and that's why the proposal lives there and not in an ordinance.
do you know if they had like public hearings on this or
Yeah,
community
the
meetings
public
where this
hearings
was?
were in November, and June is when the proposal was introduced. That was June of 2021. And then the concerns around transparency, which the proposal was designed to address, was on May 27th, 2021.
Okay, I feel like this is a little bit different from some of the other information that I've gotten, but that's fine. What public, number one, second question, is your proposal the same as the proposal that came out of the Charter Review Commission? Are these two documents
It's not, and
the
I
same?
actually, I'm glad that you raised that question because I think that's partly why there was some hesitation to give this unanimous support is if you go back and listen or watch that recording, the commission did not have the version that was being voted on. That was the version that the city attorney's office reviewed, but it was not the version that was available during that virtual meeting. And I think due to that uncertainty, folks were less enthusiastic about sending it directly to voters. However, the language itself is something that my office, with input from the community organizations that I mentioned, we have tweaked it. We have made sure that it's going to be effective and that it doesn't leave gaps for what our city is transitioning to, which is a much larger legislative body. That's why we need authority to not review but investigate the acts of all city officials. If we don't include city officials, then we're missing out on a large legislative body.
Sure, I understand that change, but can you describe for us the community engagement process that you went through to develop your version of this idea?
I did not conduct an independent community engagement process. I think I told you that I worked with council offices. I worked with proponents of the measure. There were no known opponents of this measure when it received 12 yes votes from the Charter Review Commission.
So why didn't you engage? Was there a particular reason why you didn't engage in a public engagement process?
I would say the level of support and the level of development of the proposal when I saw it, when I took term, or when my term began January 1st, for me, gave me the confidence to pursue this proposal. The other reason why I didn't conduct a full engagement process is because I had a matter of weeks before this was officially recommended to you by the Charter Commission on January 19th. My office worked as fast as possible, and we had this item on the agenda February 15th, and we pulled it at your request.
Okay, that's actually kind of helpful and gets to another question and puzzle I have. I think when you came to us with the proposals from the Charter Review Commission that they hoped that we would send on to the ballot, all of those things, or at least Charter Reform Part 2 is going to be on the November 2024 ballot. I noticed that you were proposing that we bring this Charter Reform proposal to the voters in May of this year. I'm wondering why, to me, it just seems like it would intuitively make sense to have all our charter votes on the same ballot, and indeed that's kind of the principle that seems to be baked into our current charter. So why isn't this on the 24 ballot as opposed, yeah.
I do appreciate that question. For me, I see this as kind of the unfinished business of the Charter Commission. If we were to wait until November 2024, I can't guarantee that my office would be able to fund it. And I also see it as lagging behind the transition that is already underway to create a new form of government. If it's passed, or if it's referred to voters in May and passed, that means my office can start implementing in the next fiscal year. And that would be in line with the other charter changes that are coming into effect in January 2025.
Well, an alternative path would be that it seems like there are an awful lot of questions that would need to be fleshed out in order to stand this office up. It seems like your office can engage in that work and frankly have, a couple of public hearings, collect public testimony, maybe do a work session. I would assume that, frankly, every major policy that comes out of this council goes through some sort of civic engagement process. It just actually seems odd to me that we haven't done that with this particular proposal. And not only haven't we done it, we're actually not putting it on the ballot with all the other charter reform proposals that we have here. All of this just seems kind of odd. And I think that if we took a little bit of time to actually engage with people who have done this work, I know when I think about this particular idea, and I'm very open to it, and frankly, I think as we move to our next form of government colleagues, I think that we should bake, accountability and transparency into the new way that we do business. I think one of the good examples of how we could do that would be the Oregon Public Records Advocate, or whatever they call that piece. At the same time, if you've been a student of that office, which I have been, there have been issues. There's a lot of drama around that office. I don't know what's gone wrong or if anything has actually gone wrong there, but I certainly think there are probably some lessons that could be learned if we actually kind of delved into other experiences that the lessons that we've learned from similar posts out here. So I'm just kind of confused as to why we aren't kind of doing our homework.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
Commissioner Mapps, do you have questions about the established structure of my office, including the 10-year tenure of my previous ombudsman who has been working to establish our practices?
No, I don't think so. Although I do kind of have a question about, when I first heard a version of this, I wondered, why can't we just give this power to the ombudsman? And I still frankly wish I had a forum to kind of ask that question and get some feedback around it. But we haven't really created a table where, these kind of just implementation and policy development questions can kind of be batted around.
Yeah, that's exactly what this proposal is. It's an extension of the authority that the ombudsman already has, and my office uses that authority to investigate issues of openness and transparency. We have case examples listed on our website dating back to 2015 of those kinds of issues. What this would do is create a dedicated subject matter expert that is accessible to the public in the way that the ombudsman is, except we wouldn't have to choose to take on those issues at the cost of investigating others that are threatening the life, safety, and health of Portlanders.
So do you already are you saying you already have the authority to do this in law or statute, and really this is about a budget thing? Because
yeah, there's a nuance, I suppose, that I could explain to you. There's a section of the charter that reads nearly identical to this addition.
Yeah.
And that revision is in your packet. What this does is extend the authority to investigate all city officials, not just administrative acts of city offices. So that there's a difference there, and there's a difference in creating the dedicated subject matter expertise in issues of transparency.
I think I understand the investigative piece, and I'm fine with it. I think I am still I don't know, I feel like I'm still lacking some traction around the subject matter expert. I guess I don't get why you couldn't just kind of do this now.
We could continue to do it now on a part-time basis with the resources we have.
What if we gave you more resources? Would that allow you to ramp up what you're doing and kind of get you where you want to go? Is this
I would appreciate, I would love more resources.
We're heading into budget season, so definitely make your request.
Yeah, this is my very specific ask for something that the community has proposed and pushed for many years. And so I want to honor that in this proposal.
Sure. Let me just put I guess my cards on the table. I hear your ask, and at least for me, I can't speak for my colleagues. One of the things I would ask for you is to have a more thorough public engagement process around this. This is not designed to derail this. I think it's designed to actually. My purpose here is actually to flesh out the questions and concerns that community members might have. I think we know from other transparency offices that have been established in the state, these things can can get complicated. If we can think about ways to actually make sure that we're implementing the best office that we can, I think it's worth kind of taking the time to do this. And also it's sort of kind of makes sense to me because we're going to be voting on the charter reform proposals in November of 2024. So I think we got time to do this. I don't necessarily really get why we need to do this in the next 2 months if it means that we can't have a civic engagement process. I mean, if that's the reason is we need to have it in November because we can't do a civic engagement process because we have to do this by November or May, I feel like I'd rather get this right than get this fast.
You do understand that there were proposals made by the Charter Review Commission that received 3 more votes and are not subject to additional community engagement.
Yeah.
I am not using the lack of time as an excuse for not conducting more community engagement. My argument is that in order for the city to continue its leadership in transparency and accountability, that we not lag behind major changes to our form of government and rather proactively plan and time them in sync with those changes.
Here, I'll just add one more comment, then I'll hand it over to my colleagues. I want Portland to be a leader in this space too. I actually think that this is substantively important because we are about to fundamentally reinvent the way city council works with our next form of government. I think that it's important that we put in some guardrails here to make sure that our future colleagues are being transparent and accountable. This is very important. Yeah, I think most of us probably spend about half of our time at this point trying to implement charter reform to make sure that that future government is working well. I'll tell you, one of the things we are not doing as we figure out charter reform is kind of cutting corners. And I would encourage us as we think about the transparency space that we not cut corners here. I think a little bit, taking some time to collect public testimony, hold a couple of community meetings, and have a work session with both probably build political support for this idea and would ultimately get us to a better proposal. But that's just what I think. I'll now hand the floor back over to my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Commissioner. Colleagues, any other? Commissioner Rubio.
I'll just say that I really appreciate the presentation. I think what was really compelling for me was hearing about the other cities that had similar offices or positions. And I really am drawn to this concept. For me, I appreciate what my colleague just said, and I have similar interests in just hearing some broader perspectives on this proposal or any proposal that takes shape. I really am interested in learning more about the other offices and other examples. That's how I learn, and that's how I'll feel like I can get a more complete picture. I would also love to learn a little bit more. I don't feel like I have a good command of understand, or at least to the degree that you do maybe and others do, what the gaps are so that we can assess, or it can help me learn and assess what would be a good model for proposal for Portland, and I can be very a credible messenger for that work and get behind it and support it. I want to support this concept. I really do. I just need a little more time to study it and to learn it and to see how other cities operate with it, so that I can feel good in my role of supporting this, which I want to do. So my question to you is, had you thought about having a work session, or would you be open to a work session so that we can do that?
I'm asking you today to refer this measure to voters on the May 2023 ballot. And I do want to point out that I've followed the process that you all ascribe to. I'm disappointed at the lack of engagement prior to this meeting, prior to the February 15th meeting. It's possible maybe you didn't take this as seriously as you should have. And Mayor Wheeler, the ballot language is in the packet for today's meeting. So I'm not feeling confident that setting another session will mean that anyone is further along in having reviewed these materials and giving them the consideration that they deserve.
Commissioner Ryan.
First, thank you to all those who testified today. Continually building a culture of transparency in the city is essential to building trust and ensuring Portlanders can connect with their city government. I want to read for the record additional testimony submitted to the council clerk. Phil Kiesling from Common Cause Oregon testified that the advocate should have specialized focus to allow the development of expertise in research and best practices to help public servants efficiently share information with Portland residents. Mary Beth Herkert, a retired Oregon State archivist, testified that when she established public records advocate for the state, that position was, in her quotes, able to help agencies reduce the number of nuances request and help requesters and agencies work through conflict. And Barbara Dudley, former executive director of Greenpeace USA, wrote, "It's absolutely crucial for members of the public to have timely access to information about their government, its deliberations, its sources of information, and all the factors underlying its decisions. It's what makes democracy work." This is the transparency model we should be aspiring to create here in Portland. However, the proposal in front of us is rushed. It lacks community input. For example, bureau directors are included in this proposal, yet none were engaged for input. The city attorney's staff who manage city data and records requests, which were also mentioned in the proposal, were not engaged for input. The unclear goals of the auditor's proposal as it relates to public records has many of us perplexed. From our research in considering this proposal, we understand the city has invested significantly in improving transparency, including hiring additional staff, improving software programs and training, and every month, our records team meets with public records responders citywide.
I'm sorry, are you reading your written testimony?
I don't need to be interrupted when I have the floor.
I'm concerned about whose testimony you're speaking.
The floor is Commissioner Ryan's.
Yeah, in fact, usually you wouldn't be up here when we're at this moment because you already gave your
Well, we're here for discussion, and I have concerns about whose testimony you're reading.
Madam
reading
Auditor,
my own
the
voice
floor
right
is
now.
currently
You need to be
Commissioner
clear
Ryan's.
about whose voice you're using.
Okay, for the
If we're
record.
talking about transparency,
Madam Auditor, this is my last warning. The floor is Commissioner Ryan's.
So I ended the quotes when I said Barbara Dudley, and then I pivoted and I said, this is a transparency model we should be aspiring to create here in Portland. Now I will go ahead and repeat since I was interrupted. However, the proposal in front of us is rushed and lacks community input. Bureau directors are included in this proposal, yet none were engaged for input. The city attorney's staff who manage city data and records requests were also mentioned in the proposal. They were not engaged for input. The unclear goals of the auditor's proposal as it relates to public records has many of us perplexed. From our research in considering this proposal, we understand the city has invested significantly in improving transparency, including hiring additional staff, improving software programs and training, and every month our records team meets with public records responders citywide to improve timeliness. I can attest to these improvements. As my office alone received 84 records requests over the past year, almost 10,000 pages, which are all reviewed by a number of staff, including my own. We are committed to continuous improvement in this area, but the notion one transparency advocate could manage what is vaguely proposed is at best questionable. My first conversation with the auditor on this specific topic was last Friday, and she indicated her coalition of supporters included 4 organizations, which you did name earlier. For a ballot referral, I would have expected much broader input. Mayor, I turn this back over to you.
Madam Auditor, you had a comment.
I had a concern about the use of written testimony and the clarity between Council President Ryan's remarks and those that he was quoting. I believe, if I may continue,
yeah,
that
absolutely.
we heard from experts from other jurisdictions very clearly that one FTE is enough to start this initiative and to establish this office within a system that has well-established structures and processes for interfacing with the public, and that's the Ombudsman's office.
Very good. Did you have a comment now? I do. Very good. So I'm going to read a statement. Transparency is a core value for myself and for the city, which is why the council bolstered our public records routine with an additional four full-time positions to address the backlog of public records requests in our last budget. That was 4 FTE. Equally important is the city's core values of communication, collaboration, and fiscal responsibility, values that, as you've heard from our perspective, were not upheld in the process of developing the item brought before council today. The Charter Review Commission discussed the Transparency Advocate proposal for the first and the last time in their final meeting on December 3rd, 2022, for approximately 24 minutes. During that time, members expressed concern that this item came at the 11th hour with no community engagement and no time for the Charter Commission themselves to appropriately vet the full and final proposal. Charter Commission members question the reasons for the item, given that transparency is already a core value for the City of Portland, and as discussed here today, the Ombudsman does much of what is already proposed. In lieu of putting this item directly on the ballot, they voted intentionally for this to come to council for further discussion, collaboration, and consideration. I want to be clear. Again, this is not an ordinance. This is a request to refer to the ballot a change in the governing documents of the city. In other words, if we don't get it right, we can't fix it by council ordinance. We would have to refer the changes back to the ballot in order to even tweak this proposal. In other words, we have to get it right the first time. Moreover, we've heard that this is not a panacea. We heard problems from our state public records advocate, and I've never met her personally, but she seems like a very shrewd and thoughtful and intelligent person, and she ran into problems in her tenure at the state level. And I believe there have been other issues elsewhere. Without that public engagement, we're left with a lot of confusion regarding what this item would do for Portlanders and how it would change city services. Both important clarifiers before the council should consider putting anything on a ballot that would change our city's constitution. We also lack clear understanding of the fiscal impacts of this proposal, given that creating this position with the charter would earmark ongoing funds. Well, I have heard the auditor say this is 1 FTE and only 1 FTE. Given the volume of public records requests, the number of bureaus that we currently have, the workload of the current public records individuals that the council brought on, the 4 FTE, I find it somewhat unlikely that this single position would be able to carry out the work that was detailed, and the city needs to plan for potentially major investments in additional personnel, in my opinion. To be clear, this might be the best landing place. I'm not criticizing the proposal in total. This may be the right thing to send out to the voters. I like much of what has been proposed. I like the centralized nature of this. I think as we move to a centralized form of government, it is essential that we centralize this function. I have questions as to where to centralize it and how best to do it and what the scope of work should be, but I agree with you, Madam Auditor, that we need to modernize the system. I would urge the auditor and her team to complete the internal and external engagement needed to refine this proposal so that its impact are clear to all Portlanders, that we have the public input that we as the council need to be able to refer this to ballot with confidence that we got it right. Given all that, my colleagues, that I've highlighted, I'd entertain a motion to lay the auditor's resolution on the table. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Ryan. Can I get a second?
Second.
The item is tabled.
Mayor, you need to vote on that motion to table it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm new to this. I've never tabled anything in my 6 years as mayor. There's a
enough.
first for everything. Please call the roll.
Rubio.
First, I want to thank Madam Auditor Reddy for her thoughtful and informative presentation today. I'm also reading my comments. I also want to be clear that I support the concept of creating Office of Transparency or an advocate. Transparency clearly is a value of all of us up here, and a core value for the city. And it's an expectation that we should all be held accountable to. And there isn't a day that goes by that any of us working in here during government know that we should be practicing this in our daily work. As I've stated numerous times before, I know that we can do better to improve our systems. And that's why I'm typically compelled to support any efforts to promote transparency or community engagement or center community. And people know this about our office. So the need for this improvement is clear and compelling, and so is the vision for what is possible through the guest speakers that we heard today. What isn't clear for me is how and where we are and what we aren't doing, and where, if any, are any efforts that we're doing currently working, and where are there gaps. I don't have that baseline of understanding. I don't have that knowledge that I need to inform my decision for the reasons that the mayor said. This is a permanent thing, and I want to make sure I'm doing everything in my integrity to make sure it's the right decision. And now, after this presentation, I'm super motivated to learn more about what these other offices in other cities have done, how the work has improved, how it's similar or different to our issues and our proposed model or not. I have all these questions now that are good questions that I should be asking. And I want the ability to engage with all the relevant learnings and conversations that we do with any serious matter that comes before this council, with both internal and external stakeholders, so that I can bring that full analysis to a decision, and that we have a shared baseline of understanding. And if there's one thing I've learned in my past 2 years here, is the need for baseline understanding as a starting place of collaboration and good policy work. This is why I think we would have greatly benefited from a public work session on this issue. I believe this was a miss, and we would have been, it would have been a very helpful step for us to develop a shared understanding together, and precisely why I would appreciate some time now to engage so that we can get this right and I can feel good about this and ultimately create this office or commission that we clearly so badly need. So those are some of the open questions for me, and these are the reasons that I vote in support of this. I vote aye.
Ryan.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Did you say Gonzalez?
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Sorry. Maps.
I think we're going to go on for a little bit longer today, but I wanted to share with the auditor that I appreciate you bringing this proposal forward. I actually fundamentally support this idea. I think this is something that we should bake into the next government. However, the process as a policymaker, I find to be disappointing. This is an important big move. I think it makes sense to collect feedback from the community and lawyers and everyone else who has a stake in this process. I don't think that dialogue is going to kill this proposal. I think it's going to make it better. And I hope that ultimately that's where we land. But in the meantime, I will vote in favor of the mayor's proposal to table this particular proposal. But I hope it comes back in another form with more political or more eyes on it, engagement. Thank you.
Wheeler.
I predict this will go to the ballot in the not distant future, and we'll have the opportunity to work on that. I vote aye. The item is tabled. I will now entertain a motion to suspend the rules to allow immediate consideration of a substitute resolution.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules. Please call the roll on the suspension of the rules.
Rubio.
Aye.
Ryan.
Aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Maps.
Aye.
Wheeler.
The rules are suspended. Commissioner Ryan.
Yes. Colleagues, I'd like to submit a resolution for council consideration and deliberation. Title: Resolution on Promoting Government Transparency. Whereas transparency is a fundamental principle of good governance that promotes accountability, public trust, and effective public service delivery. Whereas access to information and open communication are essential for community members to participate in the decision-making process and to hold government officials accountable. Whereas a lack of transparency can lead to corruption, mismanagement, and abuse of power, all of which undermine public trust in government institutions. Whereas there is a growing demand for greater transparency from the public and civil society organizations. Whereas council approved increased funding in the fiscal year 22-23 budget to hire 4 new full-time employees for public records process to address the existing backlog and avoid backlogs in the future. Whereas council approved the creation of a privacy and citywide data governance team to identify best practices in how city manages and shares data. Whereas council appointed a transition team for charter reform and changes to government related to Measure 26228 with the intent to educate, engage, and inform the community. Whereas council supported the now dissolved Charter Commission in the exploration of new ideas and respects that the commission did not have the time to vet the concept of a transparency advocate. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of council recognize the importance of government transparency as a means of fostering public trust, promoting accountability, and enhancing public service delivery. Be it further resolved that council requests the auditor perform the following analysis. Number 1, review city policies that promote transparency and access to information, including the adoption of open data initiatives, freedom of information laws, and whistleblower protection laws. Number 2, review existing efforts to increase public participation in decision-making and make recommendations on ways to improve those efforts, including the city's network of advisory boards and commissions, public comment periods, participatory budgeting, and other feedback mechanisms. Number 3, ensure procedures are in place to train government officials and employees on the importance of transparency and how to effectively communicate with community members and respond to their request for information. Number 4, explore the concept of transparency advocate that would review acts of city bureaus and city officials, build upon current public record practices, and aim to further increase transparency engagement. Council supports such position as having timely access to employees, information, and records. Review cost associated with a transparency advocate conceptual position, including the time and budget needed to support bureau and city official responsiveness. Be it finally resolved that the council supports the auditor providing regular reports on progress made in the research of any recommendations related to the actions listed above, and supports the auditor bringing back to council for consideration a future ballot referral that has been fully vetted and, in partnership, will continuously seek ways to enhance transparency and accountability in the city's operations.
Thank you. So the resolution is on the table. Madam Auditor, I'll give you the first word on it, and then we'll open it up to public testimony if people would like to testify. It is a resolution.
Is this a resolution you're planning to pass today?
Yes.
I have not. This is the first I've heard of it. So I don't think this honors the spirit of transparency that you all are passionate about. I'm not willing to commit to an alternative use of my office's resources without my knowledge.
Commissioner Ryan, any thoughts on that?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. So if I may paraphrase, so she does not have to repeat herself, she does not feel she's had adequate time to review this, does not think a vote today would be in the spirit of openness and transparency. Would you like a vote today, or if you want it alternatively, we could put it on an agenda for a later date? It's up to you.
I'm just I'm reading the room, and what I heard is that this is in the spirit. I know all of the, everyone did comment on this. We can give you a copy. I do think we should vote today. It's what's been vetted with all the chiefs.
Excuse me. I've had no knowledge of this resolution. It was not submitted to council prior to this meeting. I've submitted all of my documents to you.
Well, I'll tell you what, as the snow comes down and my Ford Fiesta waits for its trip across mountainous terrain, I'd be happy just tabling this all and having further discussions about it at a later date. I don't know how my colleagues feel.
I would only note that it's a request of the auditor, is certainly not a direction, right? So it's, we as a body can make the request, and she can choose how to respond in due time when she's had a time to digest it. So I don't have particular concerns making the request today, and fully understand she needs time to process it and maybe come back to us with feedback.
I agree with that statement.
May I ask for clarity for process? When issues are tabled by council, could you give us, for our shared understanding, what next steps are?
The proposal is tabled indefinitely, and so it could come back.
And who would put it on the agenda?
I presume it would be you.
It would be me.
Doesn't have to be you.
Doesn't have to
But
be.
it could be you.
It could be you.
Yes.
I'm sorry. It could be council. Council could do that as well?
Anybody could, yes. Anybody with the authority to put an item on the agenda could, yes. Or a variation of it.
Or it could be in cooperation.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, sorry, Robert.
Just Robert Taylor, City Attorney, just to clarify that point of procedure, if council has passed a motion to lay an item on the table, to get it off of the table, a motion has to pass council to take it off the table and have council consider it. So
Yeah,
that would be the proper
understood.
procedure.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
I'm sorry, could I get clarification on that? I want to make sure I follow, just so everyone's clear.
So now that it's been tabled, and this is literally the first time anything's been tabled in my tenure, my 6+ years. So my understanding, and Robert, jump up and down and object if I'm wrong on this, to untable something tabled would require a majority vote of the council. Is that correct?
You make a motion to take it off the table, another
So
majority
it'd have to
vote.
be seconded.
Yeah.
And then a majority of the council would have to vote to untable it. Is that correct?
Correct.
In its current form. Or alternatively, Madam Auditor, working with the council and the public, could propose a completely different resolution.
That could happen too.
May I ask if it's indefinite, there's no timeline on taking it off the table? It remains to be on the table until it's taken off the table?
Correct.
Okay, so we can continue to discuss this at our next soonest opportunity?
I would hope so. Absolutely. All right, so time is wasting. I'm hearing the majority. Is there any public testimony on the resolution? Is there anybody who'd like to testify on the resolution? Come on up. And could you I got your name the first time, but if you could say your name again for the record, please.
Yeah, my name is Benjamin. I got 3 minutes, I assume.
Yes, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think this resolution's great. I think neutering the city auditor's office is a wonderful idea. Giving them any sort of power or time to do investigatory things or audits on our business partners, our fellow super PACs that have financed our way into these offices. You know, I think that we should do our best to limit and curtail them completely. because otherwise we're going to have another issue where an audit on the Portland Business Alliance happens, right? A historic audit that won a national award, the Knightley Award, one of the first in the country. I mean, we can't have that again. That's a scandal on a large level. You know, the multinational lawyers over here at the Wells Fargo Center, they won't approve of that. You know, they will not be protected if we give the auditor's office certain powers to actually look into things. And I mean, the district attorney, they just cited that because Portland Business Alliance receives public funding, I think millions to fund for different FTEs and positions to advocate that people, I don't know, visit Portland or whatever. You know, that could be money to fund the auditor's office, but forget that. Like we need that. You know, us fellow dark money lobbyists, we need that protection. And to have the auditor's office the freedom to go around and look into things and act like they know what they're talking about with their facts around transparency, like forget all that. Like you agree, Mr. Ryan. I mean, this is a wonderful proposal to completely delineate any kind of progress, any kind of investigatory powers that they might have. And I think you are making the right decision. You are gonna be protected. Just so you know, especially you, Ryan, you're double protected. Maps, you're an up-and-comer. I think that those fellas over there at the World Trade Center, I think they're looking at you, and the police union already know they love you. I know they love you, you know? So I really advocate that this, whatever amendment thingy, I think it's great. I think it's great. I think, in fact, we should just do more. We should have, like, the auditor's office go pick up trash, you know? They should, and honestly, I'm gonna be honest, this could be written by ChatGPT within, like, I don't know, 5 minutes, so hopefully they don't do that. That would be an inappropriate use of the resources. But, you know, hopefully this continues and pulls forward. I'm just kind of being redundant now, but I really want to stress that y'all are made men now and women. And thank you.
Thank you, Benjamin. Anybody else? Call the roll.
Point of order.
Commissioner Maps.
What are we voting on?
So we are voting on a resolution.
Commissioner Ryan's resolution.
Okay. Thank you.
Rubio.
As I stated before, I welcome a chance to engage with the hopes of this proposal coming back to council fairly soon. We need to do our homework on this, and I welcome future conversations to come. And my intent today is that after more engagement, we'll be back here ready to move forward on a full proposal to the voters. I vote aye.
Ryan.
Yeah, this council is committed to transparency. We live it daily. In 2020, the mayor and the city council approved transparency as a core value for the city. Since then, the city's attorney's office has added 4 full-time positions to ensure we are delivering on this promise and created initiatives on privacy and open data for the public. Today, we double down on that promise through the proposed resolution. We look forward to having the auditor return to council with a fully vetted plan. Working together, we will deliver an improved transparency policy and additive transparency practices. In the spirit of cooperation, I vote aye.
Gonzalez.
Aye.
Maps.
I want to thank everyone who participated in today's dialogue. I recognize this wasn't easy. I also appreciate what the auditor is trying to do here. I actually support the initiative. I think that it's smart policy for this council to look into establishing a transparency advocate. However, I am disappointed about the lack of a community engagement process around this. I think it would help answer some of the questions that have been bouncing around this chamber today. I don't think it's hard to do. This is what we do on every major policy that comes before this council. The auditor obviously is an independent body and can behave and can move forward however she wants. However, I would encourage the auditor's office to consider, don't give up on this plan. At least for me, if you engaged in more of a dialogue and got more feedback from the people of Portland and other stakeholders here, I think that we could address all the concerns that were raised today and we could get something before the voters. But in the meantime, I will vote aye.
Wheeler.
I think we're going to get to yes, Madam Auditor. and I will work with you to get there. But how we get there matters to me, and the details also matter to me. I vote aye. The resolution is adopted. And blissfully, we are adjourned.